Thank you everyone for your patience. We will start the call. To give you a brief introduction about Fabrizio, he's an aviation entrepreneur specialized in aircraft sales and private jet management. His focus is to understand clients' aircraft needs. In the press worldwide, he shares his aviation expertise on Bloomberg, Daily Telegraph, WealthX, Financial Times, EI Financiero, and as a regular aviation analyst on Russia Today. He's also an author of the book The Quantum Economy. With this, I will hand over the call to Fabrizio for his opening comments. Over to you, Fab.
Thank you, Shweta. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us today. So I'm also an airline transport pilot with over 8,000 hours as a pilot. I've flown both private jets and for the airlines. So my expertise comes from both the technical aspect of airline and also private jet operations, but also from a business standpoint as well. So anyway, let's launch into the quantum economy, which is the subject of my book that was just released a month and a half ago, worldwide, by the way. So what is the quantum economy and why is India playing a key role in this? If we can go to slide number 2, Shweta, we'll look at the first thing here, which is important. Now, we're going to talk about Moore's law and exponential growth. Now, as you can see, there's a difference between 10 linear steps and 10 exponential steps. A linear step is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 10, for example, while an exponential step is doubling every time. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. So if we take 10 exponential steps, from 1 to 10, we end up at 512 against 10. So if you look on the right side of the screen, it shows you with the Intel processors, the development of the technology of the Intel processor. As you can see in the very beginning, there wasn't much difference between one processor and the other, because if you look at the first 4 linear steps and the first first 4 exponential steps, we're talking 1 to 8 and 1 to 4. There isn't that much difference. But once we get to, step 10, there is a big difference. And that's why you see the hockey stick and the exponential growth, or the quantum growth, as I call it. So this is kind of something really, really important that's happening with technology. And I believe, you can accelerate an economy this way as well. So if we go on to the next slide. Now, there's 5 keys to the quantum economy. You've got demographics, education, technology, low taxation, and less regulation for business. Now, these are all 5 things which the Indian government had done a great job in the last few years at making India, hit all these different things. Obviously, demographics is not something that you can really plan, but we know that the population of India is on the increase. And we also know that, the average age of the population, 65% of the population is below the age of 35. And this is really, really good. The government's investing in education, technology, they've reduced taxes and also reducing regulation. And this all favors, businesses to grow and increase speed, which is really, really important. Let's go to the next slide. Now, one of the things that you guys are doing over in India is building more airports, currently going from 148 to 220 airports by 2025. And this is really, really important. If we go to the next slide, I'll explain a concept which has been around for a while, but not many people know about it. And that, first of all, you have 400 plus airstrips, which were built by the British during World War II. And a lot of these airstrips are now being, revamped and refurbished, such as the one you can see on the slide here on the top left picture is what it looked like during World War II, and the bottom is what it looks like today. So this is something that you already have these airstrips there. Some of them need extending, some of them just need refurbishing. And this is important. If we go to the next slide, the concept of the Aerotropolis is really important to understand. Now, an Aerotropolis is basically when you build an airport for a reason. And I'll give you the classical example here is Dubai. Now, Dubai in the 1960s was simply a fishing village. And then they struck oil, they discovered oil. And so the oil companies needed to bring in people to work, people and equipment into Dubai in order to, man those oil rigs and drill for oil. So they had to develop the airport. So as they developed the airport and they brought these people in, these people needed places to live. So they built houses, they built hotels, they built schools, they built shopping malls. And so they gradually built a city around the airport. And this phenomenon is called the Aerotropolis. There are other Aerotropolis examples here on the slide that you can see, but Dubai is a classical example. So in India, you've got, different airports in different parts of India, and you've got, businesses nearby, whether it's natural resources or whether it's technology that you're building. What you really need to do is to develop the airport and the infrastructure around the airport so people can fly in, people and cargo into India, and then you can fly people out and also fly cargo out to other destinations around the world so you can export what you're producing in India. So the concept of the Aerotropolis is really, really important. As you develop the airports and you develop infrastructure around the airports, you will accelerate business and consequently do more business. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So the first market I'd like to look at here in India is the cargo market. And, we've got Spice Express, which just recently had investment of over $100 million from a UK company to develop cargo. Because, of course, if you've got, having to fly, maybe things in from abroad, you need cargo airplanes to do that. If you need to fly stuff out, you need cargo aircraft to do that. So, the cargo market is certainly on the increase. And it's interesting to see, this investment from outside India, and foreign direct investment is on the increase in India right now, as you know. And investing in one of the sectors is obviously air cargo, which is really important. If we go to the next slide, we'll talk about the airlines flying passengers. And we recently saw the demise of Go First, which is an airline in India, where they had 50% of their fleet, which was grounded. And this was due to a problem with the engines. Pratt & Whitney had sent out some faulty engines. The combination of COVID and, of course, these engines grounding the aircraft has caused the airline to go into bankruptcy. But they're coming out of bankruptcy, which is important. They did this by refinancing the airplanes, because what happens in a dynamic like this, the leasing companies that are leasing the airplanes don't want the whole bankruptcy thing to move forward, because that means freezing the assets, which will mean grounding the airplanes for at least 2 years. And the last thing you want to do with an airplane is ground it for 2 years, because airplanes are built to fly. And if you ground them for 2 years, once you restart those airplanes, they're going to have problems. And so the value of the aircraft will decrease. And the value, the aircraft is belonging to the leasing company. And so they don't want that value to go down. So they refinance the airplanes. And this is allowing Go First to restart flying. Now, the numbers are very interesting. Domestic travel and international travel combined, about 204 million passengers. That number is due to double in the next 5 to 7 years. And this is happening because you've got a growing middle class in India. And obviously the middle class want to travel. They want to go abroad. Some go to study, some go to have meetings to bring business to India. And then you've got a lot of people outside India that want to come to India to do business as well. And so that air travel is on the increase. Now, one interesting thing we're seeing with COVID, and this is a question I get asked a lot, what impact has COVID had on air travel? Well, it's had an interesting impact in the sense that obviously for leisure, people are still going to travel. You can't have a virtual holiday. But regarding business travel is down. And the reason why it's down, and it's going to stay down, is because business people during COVID discovered that they could do virtual meetings. And sometimes virtual meetings can be as effective as face-to-face meetings. So now what happens in a company when, some executives turn around and say to their managers, look, we need to go to Tokyo for a meeting. The next question is, well, can that meeting be done over Zoom, for example, or does it have to be done in person? Now, obviously, you get to a certain point where you need to meet in person and shake hands, but a lot of the meetings can be done virtually. And so we're seeing now that, where it takes 10 meetings to do a deal, 8 of these meetings are now happening online, while before maybe 5 of them were happening online. So business travel is down. But one of the trends we're seeing with business travel is we've got more and more people wanting to travel by private jet. But we'll talk a bit more about that a bit later in the presentation. We'll go to the next slide. Now, talking about cargo, and this is an interesting one, talking about the environment and everything and that. One of the interesting things that Elon Musk has said, he wants to basically put people and cargo on rockets and connect them from anywhere to anywhere in the world in less than an hour. Jeff Bezos is already working with the US Transport Command to use rockets to fly cargo from A to B. This is a technology that is already in place. Now, I don't think they're going to fly people, 100 or 200 people on it, tomorrow morning, but I can certainly see the cargo thing happening very soon. Now, that doesn't mean that every city in the world is going to have a rocket launch pad. But, I do see 30 to 50 cities around the world having a rocket launch pad and a long haul cargo being used on a rocket. Now, Elon Musk was asked, well, how many people can you get on your new rocket that you're building to go to Mars? He said, we can get about 800 passengers on there. And if we use the rocket and we reuse the rocket, the cost of the ticket will be the cost of a first class airline ticket. Now, of course, that cost will come down as the rockets are reused again and again, and people get more used to it. But this is certainly coming. Elon Musk is going to execute this, and I think Jeff Bezos is not going to sit there and wait. He's going to compete, and I think there's space for both and maybe for other companies. So when we're thinking of developing airports in India, I think one of the things needs to be thought about, and this is very important, is what does an airport need to look like for 2030 or 2035? Do we need long 4-kilometer runways, or can we do away maybe with a shorter runway? Because the technology is changing, and this has to be taken into consideration before you invest billions of dollars into developing an airport, building one from scratch, or taking one of those airfields that were built in the Second World War and refurbishing it and modernizing it. Is thinking about the rockets. Now, if we go on to the next slide, it's interesting because India already has a space program. You already have 3 launch sites for rockets in India. So I would start with using one of those and doing a deal with either Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk to start doing this transport. I mean, if India were to be the first ones to start transporting cargo between India and the United States, I think this would really put India on the map even more and accelerate you into the quantum economy. So this is something to think about investment-wise, because obviously everyone's talking about airlines and talking about cargo, but how about using the rockets? This will happen a lot quicker. I mean, it takes about 20 to 24 hours to ship something on a 747 all the way from America to India. It will take about 45 minutes on a rocket. So, think of that speed and how that would accelerate business. If we go on to the next slide, because the next thing, how much cargo can you put on one of these rockets? And we can see that SpaceX Starship is 63 tons. It's just under half of what you can carry on a Boeing 747, more than what you can carry on a 767 or a C7, or just slightly less than a C-17. So you can get, a lot of cargo on one of these rockets. Now, if we go to the next slide, and I've briefly mentioned this, what trends has COVID caused in the market? Now, we've seen private jet travel by 30%, increased by 30%. Now, this is interesting because when you look at, for example, the number of ultra high net worth individuals in the world, and we're talking just over 540,000 people, well, only 3.5% of these people own a private jet. And what happened during COVID and after COVID, where airlines have now resumed travel, but they're a bit reluctant to resume all the routes that they were flying before. In particular, in the United States, a lot of regional travel has been scrapped by the airlines because they're very cautious. It costs a lot of money to put an airplane on a scheduled route, and if you don't fill the seats, that's just gonna you're gonna lose money on those flights. So consequently, a lot of these people that have the money, the so-called ultra high net worth individuals, people worth over $30 million, but even people worth 5, 6, 7, 10, $15 million have been looking to charter private jets, lease, or even buy a private jet because business travel, as I said, is happening, but a lot of it now is moving over from first class travel over to private jet travel. And this is important. The other thing which has increased is drone delivery. I mean, imagine you have a restaurant and during COVID, obviously people couldn't come to your restaurant. Well, how are you going to get the food to the people? And Domino's Pizza in the United States has already been delivering pizzas with a drone. You can go on the app and order your pizza with a drone, and it will arrive at your house in 10 minutes. It will just send you a message on the app saying the drone is over your house. You just walk outside the house and it sends the pizza down into your hands and off you go. So this was already here before COVID, but what COVID has done, it's just accelerated it because now entrepreneurs are thinking, well, if I'm going to do a delivery service to people's homes, how can I eliminate the human being from it? So if another COVID event happens where everyone's locked down, how can I still deliver my goods to the end client? And so drone delivery is accelerated. The other thing which we saw coming to the market, and again, this was being developed before, is advanced air mobility. A lot of these flying machines are land and take off vertically. Some of them can carry cargo, some people. They're being certified right now. There's over 500 projects of a lot of them being electric. Some of them are hybrid electric and oil based. And this is something that's coming. And so when you're going to be designing a new airport, you need to think, well, if someone's going to land on a rocket just outside Mumbai, I need to get them to downtown for their meeting. You would stick them on one of the electrical vertical takeoff and landing, which carries maybe 5 to 7 people, and fly them there directly, land on top of the building, go into their meeting. And so someone could travel from Dallas over to Mumbai off the rocket in 45 minutes onto an eVTOL into town, do their 2 hour meeting, back, get back on the rocket and back home. And this could happen in the space of 5 to 6 hours, which is something that right now isn't happening. But, this is where we're going. We're going to, accelerate things and make that jump from 10 to 512, that quantum jump, which I talked about at the beginning of my presentation. So the other trend we're seeing is more entrepreneurs are learning to fly. And it's interesting because when you talk to these people, they're learning to fly for like two reasons. If we go to the next slide, and this is happening, we've noticed this trend in the United States, but it's also happening in India. Of course, the actor Tom Cruise, who's featured in the movie Top Gun, which is seen by a lot of people around the world. He flies himself, but there's lots of entrepreneurs as well. And I'll tell you the story of one in a moment. And so what these people are doing is they're learning to fly. They've always wanted to fly. They've now got the money. And they think, well, if I learn to fly and buy an airplane, I can use it for business. I can fly myself from A to B to C to D. They're also finding a lot of people now are turning to flying as a stress reliever. And I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs about this. I said, yeah, I love flying. I get up there and I just have to focus on the flying and I don't have to think about the other problems I have in my life. And it just, resets my brain and improves my performance because I'm thinking about something else. And of course, when you're flying an airplane, you have to be very focused and concentrated. And so this is an interesting trend that's happening now. These people are coming in, they're flying small airplanes initially, and then they're moving up to flying their own jet. A lot of this is fueled by the fact that a lot of the technology today built into these airplanes, there's a lot of airplanes that you can fly on your own now. You don't need another pilot. It's called single pilot operations. And so we're seeing a lot of the manufacturers from Cessna to Pilatus to Embraer building these jets that can fly with one pilot. And because of the advanced in the avionics, it is possible to do. And there's also AI coming into it now, which acts as the co-pilot for the pilot flying. So if we go to the next slide, the last minute connectivity, and we did already briefly talk about the electrical vertical takeoff and landing. This last mile connectivity has been done by helicopter up until now. There's 250 helicopters in India. The helicopter market, of course, in the US and Brazil is a lot more, as you can see from the slide. But helicopters are very expensive to run. But with the eVTOLs coming to the market, and I think the first one will be certified probably in the next couple of years, the cost of that is going to come down by almost 10 times. So this is really interesting. So 90% of helicopters will be replaced by these electrical vertical takeoff and landing. Some of these eVTOLs are powered both by electric and they're hybrids, basically. One of the challenges right now that a lot of these companies are having with certification is that it takes a lot of energy to lift off straight up vertically. And so consequently, if you're using a lot of the electricity to lift off and land, that then turns into less mileage. So they're trying to solve the battery problem. And this is why some of these companies have decided to go hybrid. So they would take off conventionally with powered by diesel or by Jet Alpha 1, and they take off from the ground and they switch into electric mode to fly from A to B and then back into normal power mode to land. And that's what's happening. But, this is going to bring the cost of flying the last mile connectivity right down. And this obviously is going to accelerate business as well. Now, the next slide, the drone market. Drones can be used for many things, and drones have been replacing helicopters already over the last 4 to 5 years on a number of things, from construction to agriculture to military and defense, law enforcement, even the media. A lot of filming now with movies is done by drones. Just to give you an example, a friend of mine years ago, he was doing what's called the traffic watch over Los Angeles. He would take off in the morning in a small Cessna with a reporter on board and would fly over the freeways of Los Angeles reporting for like 8 hours. Obviously, there's a cost to keep that Cessna in the air. There's a cost to keep 2 people on that. And now that can be done by a drone. And the drone is fully electric as well. So the carbon footprint of the drone is a lot less than flying a Cessna over Los Angeles. And so the drone market is here to stay. Lots of companies out there, but drones are certainly doing a lot of the work that helicopters used to do at a fraction of the cost, and of course, carbon footprint a lot less. So we go on to the next one, the AAM, the Advanced Air Mobility, which we talked about just earlier. This is something that's already been looked into in India, and the one you can see here, the bottom one is developed by Lilium Jet, which is a German company. They've raised over $1 billion. Companies like NetJets have already placed a lot of orders to do fractional ownership on these things. There's a development over in Florida, Lake Nona, where they intend to fly people on these back and forth to Disney World. And that So, this is something that's coming. Some of these projects, as I said, have been very well funded. There's over 500 eVTOL projects or AAM projects right now. But I don't think all of them are going to be successful. I think there's a market for maybe 15 or 20 of them. If we look at even the aircraft manufacturers today, the main ones being Boeing and Airbus, plus a few others. Same here. There's not a market for 500 of these, but certainly a market for 15, 20 companies. And a lot of these projects have been well funded. You've got companies like Toyota involved in this, Hyundai, and lots of money being thrown at this to develop these AAM solutions. Now, next one, the wealthy, and this is interesting. The wealthy are on the increase, according to the latest global rich list, and of course 209 billionaires in India right now. There's also a lot of multimillionaires being created. The rate of growth of this particular demographic is interesting, in particular in India. So obviously, putting infrastructure in place and catering for this market is important. If we go to the next slide, this population of the ultra wealthy is due to increase by 58% over the next 5 years in India. So again, private jet usage is going to increase, probably double. And so there's going to be a need for private jets. And as there's a need for private jets, there's going to be a need for infrastructure for these private jets. And if we go on to the next slide, so, looking at 10% growth initially, I think that's going to go quite quickly to 50%. Now, when you operate a private jet, a number of companies around the world, if you go to the next slide, you can see that, just bearing in mind that the fleet currently in India is the third largest in the world. Now, what India needs is they need a private jet airport, because the problem is when you're flying into Mumbai or Delhi, for example, on a private jet, there are slots. And a lot of the slots get given to the airlines flying people, or to the airlines flying cargo, because obviously they're carrying more people or more cargo. So when you're flying a private jet into one of these airports, you end up getting a slot to get in, a slot to park, a slot to leave. Sometimes there's no hangar space. So the entrepreneur that needs to come to India is thinking, I go in with my private jet, there's a slot, it's going to take me time to get in there. Then I can't leave I don't want to really park my airplane on the tarmac. I want to put it in a hangar, but there's no hangar space. So what we really need here is follow the lead of Paris, where in France, they have an airport which is purely dedicated to private jets, which is Paris Le Bourget. The same has happened in London at Farnborough and New York Teterboro. And these are just 3 examples. So, having some of these 400 airports that we talked about before that are being, refurbished from, being a World War II airport into a modern airport. I think one of the things that needs to be done is to develop some airports purely dedicated to private jets. And you would build a landing pad for the eVTOLs, maybe a rocket pad, as well as, a runway 2,500 meters long is enough to cater for all the private jets. And then you would need private jet facility, private jet terminals, which they call FBOs. You'd maybe have 2 or 3 of those at the airport, lots of parking space and a lot of hangar space as well. Sometimes the weather in India can get pretty bad. And so, these people coming in from, the US or Europe or Japan, they want to have a safe place where they can park their airplanes. So I think creating that infrastructure is going to be really, really important. Now, next slide. Why do people fly private? 3 main reasons. The first being saving time, because obviously you control the schedule. So you decide, when you're leaving and when you're landing. Flexibility as far as, which airports to land at. There are more airports available. Just to give you an example, in America, there are 500 airports which are serviced by the airlines. There are over 5,000 airports you can land at. So if you're going to somewhere like Dallas, you don't necessarily have to land at Dallas Fort Worth. Depending on where your meeting is, there may be a smaller airfield closer to the location where you're going to be having your meeting. So you would land there. And of course, safety, because you're flying on an airplane with other people that you know. You also know the pilots. You control the maintenance. You control the pilots, their training, how much they work, their rest periods, and that which you don't do when you're flying with the airlines. And pilot fatigue is one problem that a lot of airlines are having, and some private jet operators as well. So if you own your own airplane, you control that whole process, making it a lot safer. But interesting enough, when we go to the next slide, talking about safety, and this is something that not many people know, and a lot of people keep quiet about this in the private jet industry, but when we look at the numbers and we look at the number of flights and we divide it by the number of, hours flown and accidents that have happened, first of all, the private jet costs 15 times, it's more expensive to fly private than to fly first class, but the safety record is actually 9.2 times worse. And this is driven by a number of factors. There's a lot of people cutting corners on private jet operations, on maintenance, pilots' duty times and things like that, or even training. And this is creating a poor safety record, not only in India, even in the US and Europe. But this can be mitigated by having full control of your airplane. You want to have your pilots get extra training. You want certain type of training done, and we can go more into this on a one-to-one call as far as how the training needs to be catered for, also the maintenance and that, and of course parking your airplane in a hangar will help the aircraft not be damaged and things like that. So these are all factors which can actually make that safety record turn the other way around and be 10 times safer than the airlines, in particular if you operate your own airplane. Now, next one, and this is one of the problems that's happening in India, but also in other parts of the world, where people have got this low-cost flight mentality when they approach a private jet flight. So they go on these fancy apps, or they ring a broker up, the broker rings around, and they're looking for the bargain price. What has to be understood here is that with the airlines, for example, most airlines operate their airplanes 4,000 hours a year. So the airplane flies 4,000 hours a year and barely makes a profit, maybe 3 to 5% profit on 4,000 hours flying. The average private jet flies about 250 hours a year. So it's important, when you're looking to acquire either, charter a plane or lease a plane or buy a plane, don't drive the price down, because bargains can kill. And I do a lot of accident analysis with the media. Every time an accident happens, whether it's an airliner, and you can, if you look this up on YouTube, you can see my various interviews with the news. And I look at these accidents, and I can tell within the space of 10, 15 minutes, the probable cause of this accident. And a lot of it, at the end of the day, is down to cost control. The airlines trying to save money, the private jet operators trying to save money. They're not hiring as many pilots. These pilots are flying fatigued, or they're trying to save on maintenance or delaying maintenance. And all this plays into the bad safety record the private aviation has. So let's go to the next slide. Yeah, and this is where just go back to the previous slide, Shweta, the innovation tool. Yeah. Now, a lot of people they come to me wanting to buy an aircraft, and what I do is buy aircraft for people. I don't necessarily sell them a plane. I buy it. So they come to me, they pay me a retainer fee, and I ask them lots of questions to find out what their needs are, what their expectations are if they're going to fly private and they need a private jet, and what's the best solution. Should they just charter? Should they lease? Or should they buy? Or should they share a jet? You can share a jet these days. If you find somebody else locally that wants to buy half the airplane, you buy half the airplane. And so you share the fixed costs. Now, the private jet needs to be looked at as an innovation tool. Now, innovation is something that you can't measure before you innovate. And this was told to me by Clayton Christensen, the famous Harvard professor who's written a number of books on innovation. And he was saying you can only measure innovation after it's done. So this is why a lot of large companies are the innovators. The innovators are the smaller companies. Now, with a private jet, what you need to do is, yes, you need to know how much it's going to cost you to run this thing, but you need to really measure the effectiveness of this airplane as a tool, as a business tool to grow your business, to have you join that quantum economy, accelerate, get the result of 512 instead of 10. And so you do this by going down the balance sheet. After 12 to 18 months, you've been operating the airplane and seeing all the different trips that you did with this airplane, what meetings you had and what deals you closed. And you find that if you do this, the airplane will pay for itself. Now, we're going to look at two examples here. If we go to the next slide. Now, this is the story of Sam Walton. Now, if you have read this book, Made in America, which is the biography of Sam Walton, the founder of the Walmart empire, you'll discover that one of the key and secrets to building the Walmart empire was flying airplanes. Sam Walton used to be a pilot himself. He started flying small airplanes, and he would fly over different locations to figure out from the air where would be a good location to build a new store. And as he built his business, he built the fleet of airplanes up. So today, Walmart have a fleet of 30 private jets. They managed to keep the price of groceries down for people. So all those, environmentalists and that attacking, private jets, they don't realize that because the Walmart empire use private jets as a business tool. And what they do is they fly their 3 or 4 executives on one of their airplanes to 3 or 4 different locations in one day and back home for dinner with their families. Now think, instead of this happening over the course of a week, this person gets on the private jet, they have 4 meetings in one day in 3 different locations, and are home for dinner with their family. That will improve their performance. And if you improve their individual performance, you manage to improve the performance of the company. And so when you go to that balance sheet after 18 months of operating the private jets, you see that, yes, it costs you $2-3 million a year to operate, and it costs you maybe $20 million to buy the airplane. But as a result of using that plane, you made an extra $100 million. That's just an example. If we go to the next slide, there's another gentleman which I have interviewed a number of times and also done business with him. Grant Cardone. If you Google this gentleman, he's all over the internet. He has a real estate empire worth over $4 billion. And he started with a private jet. At a certain point, he was traveling around the country doing sales presentations, and he was getting a bit tired of it. And so he got to a point where, well, how do I still do the air travel? And he thought, you know what, I'll go and buy a private jet. So he spent $8 million on his first private jet, never even stepped on a private jet in his life. And he bought the airplane and used it. And he said to me, great investment. And then he moved on to a bigger jet and then further on to a G650ER, which he operates today. And his business has gone from $200 million to $4 billion. And he said, and the key has been the use of the private jet. And he says this in an interview with me on YouTube. You can check it out. We go to the next slide. Again, so do you want to go from 1 to 10 or from 1 to 512? These are the steps really to join the quantum economy, with private aviation playing a key here. We need to have that infrastructure in place, the Aerotropolis, burst serving the airlines and the cargo industry, build some airports that cater for the private jet industry, build something to allow the rockets to come in and out, and also the eVTOLs, these electrical vertical takeoff and landing vehicles which are coming. I think if India invests in these things here, aviation wise, this whole concept of the Aerotropolis will take India into the quantum economy, where instead of going from 1 to 10, you'll be going from 1 to 512 in 10 steps. And so that's really it. This is where you can find me on the next slide. You can look at my BizJet TV channel on YouTube. You can also read my articles I do every month in AvBuyer magazine. I'm doing a series right now of people that own their private jet and how they use it for business. And also get yourself a copy of my book, The Quantum Economy, which you can find on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and other websites out there. So that's all from me on this presentation. Open now to question time. And over to you, Shweta.
Thank you so much for your insightful and detailed comments. With this, I will open the floor for Q&A. Participants who wish to ask questions may raise their virtual hand, please.
So while a question assembles, let me put in 2 questions to start discussion.
Okay.
Both a little bit related. First is you did talk about advanced version of the plane that people are now looking at.
Yeah.
And then about 20 odd that you believe the market size. We have also heard a lot about people experimenting with hydrogen as a fuel, both in the existing conventional engines and they are developing new engines through the fuel cell route as well. So if you could throw some light on, is that going to take off anytime soon, or it's just that the experiment going on, we'll see how it goes. And second related question is not so related, but related nevertheless. We have had issues with the engines, as you also mentioned in your opening remark, in India, and potentially one of the reasons why, apart from several other, Go Air had to file for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
And off and on, we keep hearing that several other airlines are indeed struggling with similar problems, including in India. But it's just that it hasn't really spilled over to an extent that it will start impacting their operational performance or financial performance. So where do you think currently these issues lie, both in terms of engine, the near term and also longer term, the shift to hydrogen, if that's going to take place.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
I think the hydrogen thing is going to take place. The challenge is going to be the infrastructure at the airport. So if I fly in with my hydrogen powered airplane, I need to make sure I can refuel on the other end. So and this is where India has a great advantage. You don't have many airports, but you're building airports. So when you invest jet, you've got to think, infrastructure for this new technology. You don't go about what they want to do here in England at Heathrow Airport or even over at Vancouver Airport, where you want to build a third runway, a 4-kilometer runway. And it's going to take like 7 to 10 years to build this runway. By the time that runway is built, airplanes are going to be landing off and taking off and landing vertically. I mean, Elon Musk has already said he's working on developing an electric vertical takeoff and landing supersonic aircraft. And if there's anybody in the world that can do that, it's Elon Musk. So I think infrastructure is the challenge with the hydrogen power. But hydrogen is coming as an alternative fuel, of course, and an alternative to the problem that we have with electric, which of course is if we're going to take off and land vertically, we're going to use a lot of power to do that electrically, which means you're going to have less range. So hydrogen and maybe other types of fuel out there is certainly something that needs to be looked into. But you also have to think infrastructure. So if I want the hydrogen airplanes to come in here, I need to build the infrastructure because that will encourage companies to go to hydrogen powered aircraft. Now, on your second question, well, first of all, have I answered your first question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, let's go on to the second question, which is the engine issue that Go First have had and other airlines. Now, I'm not quite sure why this happened, but COVID slowed down manufacturing for a lot of things. And so moving the spare part business is now starting to catch up. But it's still going to take a year or two. So when you are thinking of setting up an airline and leasing some airplanes and that, and even with private jets, and I say this to people, depending on what part of the world you're in, you need to look at basically what is the infrastructure in place to get spare parts when my airplane breaks down. How soon can you get me the parts to my airplane? Because in particular with the private jet market, people don't buy a private jet because they're buying an airplane. They're buying time. They want to save time. This is the number one reason why they use private jets. So when you're buying a private aircraft, you have to think, okay, I'm going to buy, a Falcon 2000, and I'm going to operate it in and out of Singapore, for example. Well, is there a Dassault service center there? And if anything breaks down, how soon can you get the spare parts in my airplane and get it back in the air? So the same with the airlines. So you need to look at, okay, I'm going to order some Airbuses or some Boeings. They're going to be powered by these type of engines. You need to ask the question, if they're being powered by Rolls-Royce engines, okay, if this Rolls-Royce engine breaks down, how soon can you get me a new engine? How soon can you get me parts? These are questions that you need to ask, which is really, really key, because at the end of the day, airlines make money when the airplane is in the air. They lose money when the airplane's on the ground. So this thing that happened to Go First with 50% of their fleet on the ground was not a good thing. And already the airline business is a difficult business to make money in. And if you start grounding the airplanes, well, then, you're going to fail. So I would say it's not just, oh, this is a shiny new airplane. It's got really modern avionics. So the air conditioning is really great. The cabin altitude is really low. All great stuff. But I would say, look at the infrastructure in place that the manufacturer has put in order to get spare parts. Because if they tell you this airplane's very reliable, it doesn't break down, they're lying. All airplanes break down. Some break down more than others. But when they break down, how soon can you get it back in the air? Because that's where you make your money, when the plane's in the air, not on the ground. Have I answered your question?
Yes, substantially. One more part that I thought, I could get some clarity from you on is this problem over, or we are still to see the full import of the problem with P&W engines?
No, I think the problem is being solved. But I think the problem is getting people to think differently, in the sense of, we need the infrastructure. And I would say, because you've got, the Indian government's investing a lot into technology, you've got a very young workforce. I mean, I think there's scope to build these parts in India as well. So, Rolls-Royce, Pratt & Whitney, Garmin, all these different manufacturers of parts for airplanes. It's worthwhile talking to them about setting up shop in India and building these parts in India, because if let's face it, I mean, the Indian aviation market is going to grow. And it's going to be one of the fastest growing markets in the world. And because you're starting from scratch in a lot of areas, you can build something super modern right away, where one of your new airports is going to be like 35, if not 50 years ahead of Boston Airport, for example, because you built it from scratch and you built it with technology in mind and with the future in mind. So I think this is a great advantage. So certainly I'd be talking to some of the manufacturer of the parts and seeing how many of these parts you can manufacture in India, because that would solve a lot of the problems as well. So this is another level of thinking that I think needs to happen.
Sure. And because of this bankruptcy, and as you also mentioned, that the planes cannot be repossessed by the owners. And obviously there is a stay. There is a stay from the court
Yeah.
on that part. So do you think that will impact the funding of these planes going forward for India? Because so far the owners were able to repossess their planes, but now the template is established for the airlines in India that if they were to file for bankruptcy and the courts were to accept it, then those planes will remain within the custody of the airline instead of owners. Would that, and you buy a lot of planes, so based on your experience, do you think that will change either the cost or the administration of the leasing policies for India?
No, it's bringing the cost down, because what happens is the leasing company can't afford for these airplanes to be impounded and sitting on the ground for 2 years. So they go back to the airline and say, well, let's refinance this. And they usually slash that number in half to allow the airline to keep flying, because obviously it's in my interest, if I own the airplanes, that they fly. Because if they don't fly, then they're going to have all sorts of problems and the value is going to go down. And I can't allow that asset to go down in value. So it's a balancing act, really. So what do? Do I charge them half price and keep them flying and stop the value from going down? Or do I just let the airplane sit for 2 years? And most of the time, the answer is I need to keep the airplane flying. So I have to give the airline a discount, which allows the airline to keep flying. And of course, people are flying in India, and those passengers are going to go from 200 to 400 million passengers a year because, we just look at the demographics. We look at the technology being developed, the infrastructure being put in place. People are flying to and from India more and more. And so they need airplanes to fly on. So there is a need. So, the leasing company, they're not stupid. They can see that if I allow the airline to fly, I will eventually get my money back. But I need to sort of help them out, basically. And this is not only a thing that's happening in India, it's happened all over the world, where airlines end up going into the bankruptcy situation, and it's a way to renegotiate the financing on the aircraft. I'm not saying that's a strategy, but that has happened a number of times.
Sure, thanks. Sweta, if you could announce for further query from
Sure.
participant if they are.
Thank you so much for answering all the questions. Participants who wish to ask questions may raise their hand.
So let me use this opportunity to slide in one more question. Based on your experience, what do you think Indian Airlines are doing better than other airlines? And which are the areas in which you believe they are falling short and should actually look at, apart from some of the new areas that you did talk about, which is looking at potentially participating in developing rockets, or at least having some view on them, how to go about, if not people, at least cargo to start with. But in general, depending.
Yeah, well, I think, first of all, airlines in India are expanding, which is a good thing. I think one of the problems you have, and this has been a problem for a while, is bringing in and training personnel. And that's mainly pilots, flight attendants, and of course, mechanics, the engineers that, fix the airplanes. So I think the way those people are trained, it needs to be done in a different way. People have to really, know what they're doing. They have to be given a chance. I think bringing in people from abroad, or even sending young people to be trained in America or even in the UK or Germany, and that to be trained as pilots and mechanics, and maybe get some work experience abroad before coming back to India. I think that's important. Safety obviously plays an important factor in this. I was told that, for example, in India, when a young first officer joins an airline, for the first 5 years, they don't fly the airplane. They sit there, they put the landing gear up and down, they do the radio, they read the checklist for the captain. This needs to change. People need to be flying from day one. I mean, the way we do it over here in England is captain flies one sector, first officer flies the other sector. And so the first officer over time gains experience flying the airplane. So this is something that, has to happen culturally. Also, when you're in an environment like flying a jet, it's a very high performance environment, and both pilots work as a team. What happens culturally in India, and this happens in other countries further east of you, is that people don't challenge the authority. And sometimes the authority, in this case, the captain, can make a mistake. And what needs to be seen here is that the crew is a team. So if a bad landing is performed, it's not blamed on the co-pilot or the captain, it's the team that messed up. And so if I'm the first officer and the captain's flying in a bit too slow, I need to be able to say to him, excuse me, sir, you need to speed up a little bit, or you're a bit too low or too high. This communication has to happen. It's almost like we need to level it out a little bit. And this is important that this happens. I mean, Korean Airlines had a string of accidents over the years. And when you looked at the accident, you discovered that the captain had been making a mistake and the first officer would not challenge the captain. And the airplane flew into a mountain and everybody died. So they went in and trained them in what's called crew resource management, teamwork and whatever, to change culturally how they operated an airplane. So this is, a high performance environment, which enables everybody needs to perform at their best. And in order to perform at your best, you need to realize that you do make mistakes. And if the reason why there's two people on the flight deck is because the guy that the so-called pilot monitoring is monitoring the pilot that's doing the flying, and that one part of the monitoring is to call him out if he's slow, fast, high, low, in order to keep the airplane flying safely so that the performance is high performance for the team. And that's what needs to be understood, is it's a team effort. And I think that is really, really key in the training and in the company culture. And I think this is one of the challenges that India has, but can be solved also because you've got a very young workforce. So as long as these young people are influenced in the right way and trained, in building what's called airmanship, leadership capability in that. And so I think bringing in experts from abroad can help to train and develop this mindset, and maybe sending your young people overseas to train and have some work experience, and then bringing that experience back to India. And I think if you do this and you educate that workforce well, I think you'll overcome that challenge, and you'll have a very safe operation of aircraft and other flying machines throughout India, which I think is perfectly doable. It's just needs to be addressed as a cultural thing and sorted out in the way I just explained.
Thank you. One last question from my side.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about managing supply chain better for the airline, including ensuring that some of those spare parts are available as close to the areas of operation as possible.
Yeah.
So what's that critical mass, or rather critical number of planes available that will incentivize some of these OEM to start thinking of putting up manufacturing facility for, if not engine, at least spare parts in India? Does India already have that kind of critical number of planes available, or you think it will take some time?
Well, I think we always have to plan for the future. And I think, looking at the numbers, it's quite clear that, that infrastructure is needed. Now, that doesn't mean that Indian entrepreneur needs to invest. I mean, what needs to happen is, let's say, for example, Rolls-Royce or Garmin, which produce avionics, they see it, you talk to them and say, we'd like you to have a facility in India. Okay, so what they're going to look at, okay, we build a facility in India. Is there an infrastructure there? Yes, we can give you land. We can build a warehouse for you. We will, offset taxes for 10 years, or, and give them some incentive to, which doesn't necessarily mean you give them money, but give them an incentive to have the facility there. So give them the land, give them the warehouse. They can hire some local people, train them. So produce jobs locally, that whole concept of the Aerotropolis. So when you're designing your Aerotropolis, you need to design an area where you can manufacture the spare parts. So Rolls-Royce or Pratt & Whitney or Garmin or whoever makes those parts would invest money into India, but they would see that not only is there a market to do this, but also the regulatory requirements, there's less regulation, there's less tax. So they can see that they're going to make a profit by doing this, because the infrastructure that's going to be there in place, that's being designed, is an infrastructure that's going to make me money. I mean, the last thing an entrepreneur wants to do is, go into an area where they're going to be heavily taxed, heavily regulated. And I always go back to the concept of one coin. And this is the way I explain it. You imagine there's a village, and in this village, there is only one coin. And I happen to have the coin. So I need to buy some meat for my family. So I come to your store, I buy some meat, and I give you the coin. Now you have the coin. So then suddenly you need to buy some vegetables for your family. So you go to the vegetable store and you hand the coin to the vegetable store owner. And the vegetable store owner needs to buy some clothes for his family. So he goes to the clothes store and hands the coin to the clothes store. Now, as long as that coin keeps circulating, everybody will have what they need. If you start to heavily regulate the circulation of the coin with taxes and regulations and whatever, that coin is going to sit with me for 3 weeks and not go to the next person. And so that next person is sitting there on all their vegetables and they're not selling because I'm not going to buy vegetables because I don't want to use that coin, because every time I do, they're taxing me 30% or 40%, or they're creating all sorts of problems for me to move that coin. So we need to make sure that the coins can move fast. And more those coins move, more transactions happen, faster the coin moves, better the economy, and it will create a prosperity for everybody in the country, both the low class, the middle class, and also the rich. And so it's creating that environment, which, Mr. Modi, or Prime Minister, has been making a very good effort of doing this over the last few years. And that infrastructure is being put in place.